Welcome to Moonlit Inc. BL. A BL story written under moonlight. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Clash of Titans. The air in the SN Entertainment soundstage was thick with the scent of expensive espresso and the frantic ozone of overtaxed steamers. Wade Park adjusted the cuffs of his own charcoal blazer, his expression a mask of practiced, glacial calm. As the creative force behind WP Designs, he was used to chaos. He lived for the frantic energy of a looming deadline. But today, the chaos had a name, a height of 190 centimeters, and a scowl that could freeze boiling water. Rio Lim. I said no. Rio's voice drifted across the studio, deep and resonant, cutting through the chatter of assistants like a blade. Wade exhaled slowly through his nose and stepped around a rolling rack of leather trench coats. He found his lead stylist, a trembling young man named Miho, holding a sheer, structured silk shirt as if it were a live grenade. "Is there a problem?" Wade asked, his voice smooth and authoritative. The stylist scattered like minnows. Rio Lim stood in the center of the dressing area, shirtless, his physique so imposing it felt like he was taking up all the oxygen in the room. He was a marvel of biological engineering. Broad shoulders that tapered into a lean, powerful waist, skin the color of cream shadowed by the harsh studio lights. Even other models looked like sketches next to his finished masterpiece. Rio turned his gaze toward Wade. His eyes were dark, sharp, and currently narrowed in total defiance. "The help has cold hands," Rio snapped, gesturing vaguely at Miho. "And the fabric feels like sandpaper. Get it away from me." Wade took the silk shirt from Miho's hands. "It's 15 mom mulberry silk, Rio. It's the softest material on the market." "Then the market is failing," Rio retorted, crossing his massive arms over his chest. He didn't move, he just loomed, a tower of muscle and stubbornness. Wade stepped into Rio's personal space. He didn't flinch at the height difference. He had dressed kings and icons. He wasn't about to be intimidated by a man who was paid to look pretty. "This collaboration with SN Entertainment is the cornerstone of the fall collection," Wade said, his voice dropping to a low, velvet warning. "We are behind schedule. The photographers are billing me by the hour, and you are currently standing in my studio, in my light, refusing to wear my art." He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from Rio's shoulder to guide him toward the mirror. Before he could make contact, Rio flinched. It wasn't a small movement, it was a violent, visceral recoil, his entire body tensing as if Wade had tried to brand him with a hot iron. The studio went silent. The hum of the steamers seemed to die out. Rio's chest heaved, his eyes darting to Wade's hand and then back to his face. For a split second, the arrogance flickered, revealing something raw and jagged underneath, a hypersensitivity that bordered on a phobia. But as quickly as it appeared, the wall went back up. "Don't touch me," Rio hissed, his voice trembling with a cocktail of anger and something Wade couldn't quite name. "Just, stay back." Wade lowered his hand, his mind racing. He was a professional, he treated his models with the utmost care, often pinning their hems himself to ensure the silhouette was perfect. He was known for his personal touch. But Rio Lim wasn't looking for a designer. He was looking for an exit. "Fine," Wade said, stepping back just enough to give the younger man air, though he didn't break eye contact. "Miho, leave the shirt on the rack. Everyone, take 15. Clear the floor." "But Mr. Park." 15 minutes, Wade repeated, his eyes never leaving Rio's. As the crew scrambled out, the heavy double doors swinging shut with a dull thud, Wade draped the silk shirt over his arm. He looked at the man who was supposed to be the face of his brand, a man who looked like a god but acted like a cornered animal. The fall collection was due in 3 weeks. And Wade Park had just realized that his greatest challenge wasn't the tailoring, it was the man inside the suit. Chapter 2, The Breaking Point. The silence of the WP studio at midnight was a different beast than the chaos of the day. It was heavy, smelling of ozone, steam-pressed wool, and the faint, bitter scent of black coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Wade sat hunched over his mahogany worktable, the pool of a single halogen lamp illuminating his hands. He was meticulously hand-stitching the lining of a structured wool overcoat, the centerpiece of the collection. His fingers moved with a rhythmic, surgical precision, but his mind was a jagged mess. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the way Rio had recoiled in the studio. "Don't touch me. You're going to ruin the tension of the thread if you keep gripping the needle like a weapon." Wade didn't jump, but his hand froze. He looked up. Rio Lim was leaning against the doorframe of the darkened atelier. He wasn't in his usual high-fashion armor, he wore a simple, oversized black hoodie and joggers, but even in the shadows, his silhouette was undeniable. He looked less like a world-class model and more like a ghost haunting the halls of SN Entertainment. "The building is supposed to be locked," Wade said, his voice raspy from disuse. He didn't put down the needle. "I have a key. They don't want their star asset getting mobbed on the street, so they let me come and go as I please," Rio said, stepping into the circle of light. He moved with a strange, liquid grace, but he kept a careful 3-foot perimeter between himself and the table. "Why are you still here, Park? You have a literal army of seamstresses for this." "They don't see the curve of the shoulder the way I do," Wade replied, finally setting the coat down. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "And I can't sleep when my lead model is treating my set like a battlefield." "What was today, Rio?" "The trousers were too heavy. The lighting was too sharp. Give me the truth. Just once." Rio's expression shifted. The arrogance he wore like a shield during the day cracked, just a fraction. He reached out, his long, elegant fingers hovering over a scrap of discarded silk on the table. He didn't touch it. He just stared at it. "Everything is too much," Rio whispered. It was the first time Wade had heard him speak without a snarl or a bite. "The lights. The people. The way they grab at me like I'm a piece of meat they're trying to tenderize. They don't see me. They see a 190-centimeter mannequin that brings in revenue." Wade watched him, his designer's eyes softened by a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. "I don't see a mannequin, Rio. I see the only person capable of carrying this collection." "Liars say that to get what they want," Rio snapped, his head whipping up. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a flash of heat. "You're just like the rest. You want the perfect shot, the perfect walk, the perfect WP image. You don't care if the fabric feels like it's suffocating me." Wade stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "If I didn't care, I wouldn't be here at 1 a.m. hand sewing the seams so they're flush against your skin. I'm trying to build you a suit of armor, you idiot, not a cage." They stood on opposite sides of the lamp, the light casting long, dramatic shadows across the room. Rio was breathing hard, his nostrils flared, his tall frame trembling slightly. He looked like he wanted to bolt, but his feet stayed rooted to the floor. "You're too close," Rio breathed, though Wade hadn't moved an inch. "I'm not close enough," Wade countered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous velvet. "Because I still can't figure out if you're trying to sabotage me, or if you're just terrified that for once, someone is actually looking at you." Rio didn't answer. He just stared at Wade, his dark eyes searching the designer's face for a lie he couldn't find. The tension in the room shifted, it was no longer the friction of two professionals clashing. It was something heavier. Something electric. Rio turned abruptly, his boots echoing against the floor as he headed for the exit. "The overcoat," he called out over his shoulder, his voice thick. "Make the lining silk. The heavy wool, it's too loud." Wade watched him disappear into the darkness of the hallway. He looked down at the coat on his desk. He had already planned to line it with silk. He picked up the needle again, his heart drumming a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The deadline was closing in, and for the first time in his career, Wade Park wasn't worried about the clothes. He was worried about the man. Chapter 3, I Want You. The day of the final fitting arrived like a thunderstorm. The air in the WP studio was static charged, humming with the nervous energy of 10 assistants who were all walking on eggshells. The collection was due for its digital lookbook reveal in 48 hours, and Rio Lim was currently standing in the center of the dressing room, refusing to put on the final look. It was a masterpiece of avant-garde tailoring, a structured, midnight navy suit with a lapel that mimicked the jagged edge of a broken wing. It was bold, it was edgy, and on Rio, it would have been iconic. Instead, Rio was wearing his own clothes, his jaw locked, staring at his reflection as if the mirror had insulted him. "I won't wear it," Rio said, his voice a flat, dead calm that was far more terrifying than his usual shouting. "Rio," Wade started, his voice strained. He felt a dull throb behind his temples. "We've adjusted the lining. We've changed the thread. We've even swapped the detergent for the one you use at home. What is left to complain about?" "It's not the clothes," Rio murmured, eyes fixed on the mirror. Wade snapped. The professional mask he had worn for 15 years didn't just crack, it shattered. "Then what is it?" "Because I am losing my mind. I have spent 3 weeks catering to every whim, every tantrum, and every sensitivity you have. I have missed sleep, I have bled on these fabrics, and I have defended you to the board of SN Entertainment while they were screaming for your replacement." Wade stepped forward, his boots clicking sharply on the tile until he was standing directly in front of the taller man. He was close enough to smell the faint hint of sandalwood on Rio's skin. "Everyone, out," Wade commanded, not looking back. "But Mr. Park, the schedule." "Out!" Wade roared. The room cleared in 5 seconds flat. The heavy soundproof door clicked shut, leaving the two of them in a silence so thick it felt like it could be cut with a pair of fabric shears. Wade looked up at Rio, his chest heaving. "You are remarkably tall, Rio. You have a physique that designers would kill to dress. But right now, you are the smallest person I have ever met. Tell me what you want. No riddles. No complaints about textures. Tell me what it takes to get you to walk." Rio didn't flinch this time. He didn't pull away. He looked down at Wade, his expression shifting from that icy defiance into something terrifyingly serene. The handful model, the tantrum thrower, the pain in the neck, he vanished. In his place was a man who looked like he had finally reached the end of a very long rope. "You really want to know?" Rio asked. His voice was no longer a growl, it was a soft, dangerous caress. "I'm begging you," Wade whispered, exasperated. "Tell me what you want." Rio took a single step closer, closing the final inch of distance until his chest was nearly brushing Wade's blazer. He didn't reach out to touch, he knew the rules, but he leaned down, his lips hovering just inches from Wade's ear. "I don't want the silk, Wade. I don't want the fame, and I certainly don't want to be touched by 100 people who don't know my middle name." He pulled back just enough to look Wade in the eye. His gaze was predatory, yet desperately honest. "I want you," Rio said. The words hung in the air, heavier than the wool coats on the racks. Wade's breath hitched. He had expected a demand for more money, a longer break, or a different photographer. He hadn't expected a confession that sounded like a surrender. "I want the person who stayed up until 2 in the morning because he cared about the curve of my shoulder," Rio continued, his voice steady. "I want the only man who looks at me and sees a person instead of a product. So, if you want me to wear your clothes, you're the one who has to put them on me. Every button. Every zipper. Only you." Wade looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized the tantrums hadn't been about the clothes at all. They were a test. A clumsy, desperate cry for the attention of the only man who had ever treated him like he was made of more than just glass and ego. The silence stretched, no longer tense with anger, but thick with a new, terrifying possibility. Chapter 4, The Private Fittings. The following morning, the atmosphere at the WP studio had shifted from a battlefield to a sanctuary. Wade had cleared the schedule, sending the frantic assistants to the production floor across town. For the first time, the heavy industrial locks were turned from the inside. It was just the two of them. Wade stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the morning sun casting long, golden bars across the hardwood. Rio stood on the raised circular dais in the center of the room, stripped down to his basics, waiting. He looked less like a defiant star and more like a man awaiting a ritual. "The navy suit," Wade said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the way his heart hammered against his ribs. "We'll start there." He picked up the trousers. Usually, a designer would toss them to a model or let a dresser handle the logistics. Not today. Wade approached the dais, stepping into that 3-foot radius Rio had guarded so fiercely for weeks. This time, Rio didn't flinch. He watched Wade's hands with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. "Step in," Wade commanded softly. Rio obeyed, placing a hand on Wade's shoulder for balance. The contact was electric, the first time Rio had initiated a touch. His palm was warm, his grip firm. Wade knelt, his fingers brushing the skin of Rio's ankles as he pulled the fabric up. He could feel the fine tremor in Rio's legs, a silent admission of how much this intimacy cost him. As Wade rose to fasten the waist, he was forced to stand inches from Rio's midsection. He could feel the heat radiating from the model's body. Wade's fingers worked the custom silver button, his knuckles grazing the soft skin of Rio's stomach. He heard Rio's breath hitch, a sharp, jagged intake of air. "Steady," Wade whispered, more for himself than for the man towering over him. Next came the shirt. Wade held it open, and Rio slid his arms into the sleeves like a king being dressed for a coronation. Wade began to work the buttons from the bottom up. With every button he fastened, he moved higher, his face coming closer to Rio's. By the time he reached the collar, they were eye to eye. Rio's gaze was dark, unblinking. "You're being very careful, Wade," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that Wade felt in his own chest. "I don't want to snag the silk," Wade replied, though they both knew it was a lie. He was being careful because he felt like he was handling a high-voltage wire. One wrong move, and they'd both burn. Wade reached for the tie, looping it around Rio's neck. To tighten it, he had to pull Rio slightly forward. Their faces were so close now that Wade could see the golden flecks in Rio's irises. The air between them was thick, flavored with the scent of expensive fabric and a sudden, undeniable hunger. "The suit fits perfectly," Wade breathed, his hands lingering on Rio's chest, smoothing the lapels. "It doesn't feel like a cage anymore," Rio replied. He reached down, his large hands covering Wade's smaller ones, pinning them against his heart. The beat beneath the fabric was wild and fast. "Because it smells like you. Because you're the one who put it there." The fitting had long since stopped being about the fall collection. Wade realized that by claiming this exclusivity, Rio had marked him. And as Wade looked up at the man he had spent weeks cursing, he realized he didn't want to be anywhere else. "We have 6 more looks to go," Wade whispered, though he didn't pull his hands away. Rio leaned down, his forehead resting against Wade's. "Then take your time, designer. I'm not going anywhere." Chapter 5, Runway and Reality. The night of the WPXSN Entertainment debut didn't just arrive, it exploded. Outside the venue, the rhythmic flash of paparazzi bulbs created a strobe light effect against the blackened windows of the sleek town car. Inside the vehicle, the silence was absolute. Wade sat in his signature tuxedo, his hands resting on his knees. Next to him, Rio was a vision in the midnight navy suit, the broken wing ensemble. He looked lethal. He looked untouchable. But beneath the seat, out of sight of the tinted windows, Rio's hand was gripping Wade so hard his knuckles were white. "The moment we step out, you're not mine anymore," Wade said softly, his voice barely audible over the muffled roar of the crowd outside. "You belong to the cameras. You belong to the brand." Rio turned his head, his sharp jawline catching the stray light of a passing flash. I'm wearing your stitches against my skin, Wade. I'm wearing your scent in my hair. Let them take their pictures. They're only seeing the shell. The door opened. The wall of sound hit them like a physical blow. Wade stepped out first, the consummate professional, shielding Rio just enough to give him space to breathe. But the moment Rio Lim hit the red carpet, the atmosphere shifted. The pain in the neck model was gone. In his place was a titan of the industry. He moved with a new, terrifying fluidity. He wasn't flinching at the lights, he was consuming them. Every step Rio took was a testament to Wade's craftsmanship. The way the fabric moved, the way the silhouette held, it was a symphony of design and soul. From the wings of the runway, Wade watched the final walk. As Rio reached the end of the pier, he didn't do the standard cold stare. He paused. For a fraction of a second, his eyes scanned the darkness of the VIP section until they locked onto Wade's. A small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, a secret shared in front of 1,000 lenses. The show was a triumph. The critics were already calling it the rebirth of the edgy aesthetic. But as the after-party roared into life in a penthouse downtown, the victory felt hollow. Wade stood on the balcony, the cold Seoul air biting at his face. The celebration was loud, filled with people who wanted a piece of his success, but all he could think about was the flight manifest in his pocket. Seoul to Paris. 8 a.m. You're hiding, a voice said. Wade didn't need to turn around. Rio joined him at the railing, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled from a night of being pursued by socialites. I'm leaving in 5 hours, Rio, Wade said, staring out at the Han River. The board wants me back at HQ. The collaboration is finished. My job here is done. Rio stepped closer, ignoring the glass door behind them where a dozen journalists were pretending not to watch. He didn't care about the rumors anymore. He leaned his hip against the railing, invading Wade's space with the easy confidence they had built in the quiet of the atelier. Your job as a designer might be done, Rio said, his voice dropping to that private, velvet register. But we haven't even finished our first real date. You took me to a studio floor and fed me cold noodles, Wade. You owe me a proper dinner. Wade looked at him, his heart aching with a sudden, sharp intensity. I'm going to be 6,000 miles away. Rio reached out, and for the first time in public, he initiated the contact. He tucked a stray lock of Wade's hair behind his ear, his thumb lingering on the designer's temple. Then I'll just have to make sure I'm the only model you ever think about, Rio whispered. Go to Paris. Do your showcase. But don't think for a second that this suit is the last thing you're putting on me. Chapter 6, The Parting Gift. The Incheon International Airport Terminal was a cathedral of glass and steel, echoing with the hollow announcements of departures that felt far too final. Wade stood by the security gate, the collar of his overcoat turned up against the draft. Beside him, Rio looked like a man carved from shadow. He wore a heavy mask and a low-slung cap to ward off the ever-present lenses of the paparazzi, but to Wade, he had never been more visible. You're going to be late, Rio said. His voice was muffled by the mask, but the vibration of it still found its way under Wade's skin. I've never missed a flight in my life, Wade replied, attempting a lightness he didn't feel. He adjusted the strap of his carry-on, his fingers lingering near Rio's sleeve. The Paris team is already prepping the spring mood boards. It's going to be a long season. Rio reached out, his hand wrapping around Wade's wrist, not a tentative touch, but a grounding one. Don't let them work you to death. And don't you dare find a new muse. I don't care how many French models try to squeeze into your silhouettes. They won't fit the way I do. Wade smiled, a genuine, tired thing. No one fits the way you do, Rio. You're a nightmare to tailor for. Good, Rio murmured. He leaned in, the brim of his hat shielding them from the world for one stolen second. Distance is just a measurement, Wade. And you're the master of those. I'll see you soon. I promise. With a final, lingering squeeze of Wade's hand, Rio turned. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He walked toward the exit with that long, predatory stride, disappearing into the sea of travelers. Wade watched him go until his chest felt tight, then turned toward the gates. He had a kingdom to run, after all. 20 minutes later, Rio settled into the back seat of his blacked-out sedan. The driver pulled away from the curb, weaving into the gray flow of morning traffic. Rio leaned his head against the cool glass, his eyes closed, already feeling the silence of the city now that Wade was leaving its airspace. As he shifted, his hand brushed against something on the seat beside him. It was a garment bag. High quality, midnight black nylon with the WP logo embossed in gold. Rio frowned. He hadn't brought any wardrobe changes with him. He unzipped the bag slowly, the hiss of the zipper the only sound in the car. Inside lay a suit unlike anything from the fall collection. It was ivory, a daring, pristine color, crafted from a wool-silk blend that felt like a second skin. It was structured yet soft, a perfect marriage of Wade's edge and Rio's newfound vulnerability. Pinned to the inner lapel, right over the heart, was a small, heavy card. Rio took it, his fingers trembling slightly. In Wade's elegant, sharp handwriting, it read: "I realized the Navy was for the world to see you. This one is for me to see you. It's the perfect fit, no tantrums required. Use this on my next showcase. I'll be waiting at the end of the runway. WP." Rio looked out the window at the sky, where a silver streak of a plane was rising through the clouds. He clutched the ivory fabric, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He wasn't just a model anymore. And Wade wasn't just a designer. They were a masterpiece in progress. Epilogue. The cobblestone streets of Paris were slick with a fine afternoon mist, turning the city into a blurred painting of charcoal and gold. Wade Park stood in the center of his new atelier on the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, his brow furrowed as he stared at a mood board. The Parisian air was colder, crisper, and despite the success of his move, it felt significantly emptier. He reached for a piece of charcoal silk, but his hand stopped mid-air. "The drape is wrong," a deep, familiar voice rumbled from the doorway. "It needs more tension. Or perhaps, just a better muse." Wade froze. He turned slowly, his heart performing a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a smirk that could set the Seine on fire, was Rio Lim. He wasn't wearing the ivory suit yet, he was dressed in a heavy black overcoat and a cream turtleneck, looking every bit the international superstar. "Rio," Wade breathed, the name a prayer. "You're supposed to be in Seoul for the SN Gala." "I told you," Rio said, walking into the room and closing the distance between them until the air grew thin. "Distance is just a measurement. And I decided I was tired of being measured in kilometers." The first real date. They didn't go to a star-studded gala or a crowded bistro. Wade took him to a secluded, centuries-old restaurant tucked away in Le Marais, where the candles were low and the wine was the color of crushed rubies. For the first time, there were no cameras. No assistants. No sensitivities. Rio sat across from Wade, his large hand resting openly on the table, inviting Wade to touch him. And Wade did. He traced the lines of Rio's palm, marveling at how the man who once flinched at a stylist's touch now leaned into his every caress. "You look different here," Rio murmured, swirling his wine. "Less like a general, more like a man." "It's the company," Wade admitted. When the bill was paid, they walked along the Seine. Beneath the shadow of the Pont Neuf, Rio pulled Wade into a secluded alcove. The sounds of the city faded into the background. Rio reached out, his thumb brushing Wade's lower lip. "I've been thinking about this since the airport," Rio whispered. He leaned down, and finally, the tension that had been building since that first disastrous fitting snapped. The kiss was slow, tasting of red wine and longing. It wasn't the frantic clash of two rivals, it was the soft, inevitable merging of two souls who had finally found their perfect fit. Rio's hands, usually so hesitant, gathered Wade close, pulling him against his chest as if to prove he was finally, truly there. The penthouse. Wade's penthouse overlooked the sparkling lights of the Eiffel Tower, but as they stepped through the door, neither of them looked at the view. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The cool Paris night was locked outside, replaced by the sudden, heavy heat of two people who had waited far too long. Wade's keys hit the marble console with a sharp clack as Rio backed him against the door, his kisses becoming more urgent, more possessive. "Rio," Wade gasped, his hands tangling in the thick dark hair he'd spent weeks dreaming of. "Show me," Rio breathed against his neck, his voice a low, gravelly command. "Show me what you were thinking about when you made that ivory suit. Show me how I fit." Wade led him to the bedroom, the space minimalist and elegant, much like the designer himself. But as they fell onto the silk sheets, there was nothing minimal about the way they moved. It was a dance of skin and heat, of Wade's artisan hands mapping out every inch of the body he had once only been allowed to measure from a distance. Rio was no longer a model, and Wade was no longer a designer. In the shadows of the Parisian night, they were just two halves of a whole, finally stitched together in a way that no one, not the industry, not the distance, could ever undo.